Welcome everyone to this webinar, The Road to Autonomous Vehicles, a new flexible European regulatory framework. I was thinking this morning whether I should, of course, say, and then I decided that I would, that currently, of course, there are more crucial and important issues in Europe going on, as we all know. Still, we decided to go ahead with this seminar. There is an overwhelming interest, obviously, in this topic. We have almost 450 registrations for today. So let's see how many people will then end up in this webinar, which just shows how big the interest is when it comes to this topic. I think the main reason also, particularly for this, are the excellent panelists that we have today. And I'm very happy to introduce briefly every one of our panelists today. They will also then later introduce themselves and say what keeps them busy when it comes to autonomous vehicles. But let me just introduce the panel today. My name is Patrick Ayert. I'm the global leader of mobility transportation at Hogan Lovells, which comprises automotive, transport logistics, and aerospace defense. More importantly, with us today is, starting in alphabetical order, Richard Damm. He is not only the president of KBA, the Kraftfahrt-Bundesamt, but also the chairman of the UNECE Working Party on Automated, Autonomous and Connected Vehicles. Then we have Maria Cristina Galassi, project leader safety of connected and automated vehicles at the Sustainable Transport Unit of the European Commission JRC, the Joint Research Center, which deals a lot with research projects for the European Commission and then the legislation eventually. And last but not least, Jessica Uguccioni, and we hope to have her also with us visible soon, the lead lawyer for automated vehicles review for the Law Commission of England and Wales, which basically advises the government on this topic. All three of these excellent panelists have a very broad experience when it comes to autonomous vehicles. And what was also important for us today is to bring together, from a regional perspective, also policymakers from Germany and also representing the UN view from Europe, and then certainly also from the UK. We wanted to maybe also introduce someone from France, we're not able to get someone at this stage, but I think we will also address briefly the situation in France today. Now, we want to talk about autonomous vehicles. And if we go on the next slide, and I think I can do it myself. Sorry, that was one too quick. Probably we are both clicking. Shush, I'm sorry, it was my fault. Here, as a reminder, the levels of automated driving. This is a chart from SAE. There is now like a joint standard, ISO SAE 22736 from 2021, which sets out the different levels of automation. Here, this chart that was already introduced by SAE before. And I think when we talk about autonomous vehicles in particular here, we are trying to address level 4. Of course, also in level 3, a vehicle can drive autonomously, but the main difference is simply that the driver is still requested to intervene in certain situations, whereas in level 4, within the so-called ODD, the operating driving domain, there is no interference by the driver. And this is what we want to address in particular today, but I guess we will also speak about the other levels and how the different players get to level 4, because there are players that get to level 4 through the other levels like 1, 2, 3, but then we have also players that go right away to level 4. And I think it's also important to note that we all basically have one common goal, be it the policymakers, the stakeholders, the industry, the advisors, the lawyers. Everyone wants to introduce autonomous vehicles as quickly as possible. And so also we, as a law firm, then certainly also advising one or the other player, thought that we want to somehow be part of this development, which is why we then eventually came up in October 2021 with this white paper, which we called the Road to Autonomous Vehicles. And basically what we said is that we acknowledge that people are coming from different directions to introduce this technology and to basically eventually then introduce it into the European market. The traditional automotive players, the vehicle manufacturers, the suppliers play a role, the ADS developers and other new entrants. And so it is important to allow everyone to be part of this development. And basically, if someone decides to introduce that, to also be able to do it. And for us, the key issues are the assumption of the regulatory responsibility for these vehicles, and most importantly, also a certain proof of the safety concept, that this technology is safe, as safe it can and should be when you introduce these vehicles to the market. Because as you all know, the perception in the market is still a little bit undecided. Do people really want autonomous vehicles? Are they concerned about the safety risks also? And so I think for us, it is important that we have only players in the market that introduce that are able to satisfy these concerns and address these concerns, whoever this might be. And this was basically the reason also for this white paper. A final point before we go to the panel discussion maybe is, and I read some comments when this was introduced also in social media, there were some comments like, oh, that's interesting, a flexible European regulatory framework. How does this work with lawyers? Are lawyers flexible at all? Well, that's a fair point. But I think also not just lawyers, but people who deal with legislation and introduce legislation have to somehow acknowledge that the technology is developing. And at the same time, we still have to provide a legal framework for this. So I remember a couple of years ago, I was at a conference in Sweden, and there were about 600 or 700 actually technicians. And there was a poll about what is the biggest obstacle to introduce autonomous vehicles. And the top #1 answer was the legal framework. I did not quite understand that at that time already, because I thought there were also some other issues. But now we've seen a lot of movement, a lot of legislative developments. I think we are ready, more or less, from the legislative side. We will discuss it today. And so this should not be an obstacle to introduce these vehicles. And just in time, I see also Jessica now on the screen, which is great. So we can start this panel discussion. And I would ask each of you, I've briefly introduced you, but maybe each of you could also tell the audience what keeps you currently busy when it comes to autonomous vehicles, which will also tell the audience a little bit further about your role. And maybe starting again in alphabetical order with Richard. We are not hearing you, Richard.
So can you hear me now?
Very good.
Very good.
Thank you.
Hi, Patrick, and hello to everyone, and also to Maria and Jessica. So it's a pleasure to be here to speak during this webinar and answer your questions. And it's really amazing to see there's a big audience here, also the people joining from around the world. Just a few sentences with regard to my person. So my name is Richard Damm. I'm president of the KBA, as Patrick already announced. KBA is the Federal Motor Transport Authority here in Germany. Amongst other topics, we are granting the type approvals based on European, national, and UN legislation. We are also doing the market surveillance for Germany according to the European rules, and we are the product safety authority here in Germany for traffic vehicles. I'm also working at the UNECE, chairing the working party dealing with automation, autonomous vehicles, and connected vehicles. My background is vehicle engineering. I've studied at the Technical University in Munich some years ago, and worked quite some time on European projects in the area of passive safety and biodynamics and or biomechanics, and moved later on to the Ministry of Transport and Digital Infrastructure, dealt with several topics in passive safety, general safety, camera monitor systems for vehicles, also with regard to the electric scooters, which have been implemented and introduced here in Germany some years ago. Also a topic which only has friends or haters, so that's quite typical. And moved to the KBA beginning of 2020, dealing especially with automation, which keeps us busy, and that's good on the national, European, and the international level. So it's quite challenging, but also exciting topic. So nice to be here.
Thank you, Richard. And Cristina, you were next in alphabetic order, so please.
Thank you, Patrick. I hope you can hear me. Very good. So thank you a lot, first of all, for the invitation. This will be indeed the first time that we are talking publicly about the new EU regulation outside the working groups, let's say. So I'm very happy to be here with you today. So as you introduced, Patrick, I'm working at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. And as many of you may already know, JRC is providing scientific advice to the colleagues in Brussels. So we are supporting with the technical scientific evidence EU policies. And in this case, my work is to support the colleagues from DG GROW in the development of the new regulatory framework for connected and automated vehicles at both EU and the global level. So we also contribute at UNECE work. And indeed, I'm leading JRC activities on safety of connected and automated vehicles. So my background is in aerospace engineering, and I also got a PhD in nuclear industrial safety. And I have to say, even if coming from a different background than the automotive sector, this was quite helpful. So to use my previous knowledge and contributing to the development of this new framework. So I think this is all from my side. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. An aircraft is able to fly autonomously. So this is not a new concept to them. So I fully understand. Jessica, I hope it works now, the tone. You just have to unmute yourself.
See.
Yes,
there we
it
are.
works. We hear
Hello,
you.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, I kept on having connection issues, which is opposite. We need to be flexible. I heard you saying that before, Patrick. So my name is Jessica Uguccioni. I work with the Law Commission of England and Wales. And since 2018, we've been advising the UK government about developing legislation for self-driving vehicles. And I've had the pleasure of working with many colleagues, including Cristina, internationally as well at the UN and with the European Commission in differing places, in relation to Europe, of course, following Brexit, but still very, very important dimension to our work. So we published our report in just this January, not even a month ago. And that has recommendations for changes to legislation for the UK. And in terms of myself personally, I've been with the civil service and working on law reform projects since 2010. And before that, I started off in private practice in New York with Cleary Gottlieb, and then in London. And then I have been in academia for a few years as well at Durham University, teaching law, predominantly contract law and equity. So that's my background. I'll stop there until we launch into discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. And I would like to start now with Cristina, and you already referred to the EU draft regulation on ADS. And I was happy to hear that you said, well, this is maybe the first time that you are now talking about this on a public webinar, so to say. So that's great. So people will get some insight here. Where do we stand currently in these discussions? What can we expect, also considering that we have certain laws introduced in France, in Germany, Germany 2017, but now last year also, and only last week or so, finalized the ordinance for really level 4 vehicles as well. So we have national legislation, and now the EU. is introducing a framework. Tell us a little bit about it and how you see this interplay also with the other member states.
Okay, very well. So, as you are aware, we have since 2019 a new legal framework, which is the EU Vehicle Safety Regulation, that indeed covers different levels of automation, but it also provides a legal basis for developing technical rules for connected and automated vehicles. And indeed, we are now in the process with this new piece of regulation to setting these new technical rules. And basically, as I mentioned also in the beginning, we are working on two different work streams. So we work at the UNECE on level 3 and level 2 systems. And there we also, of course, collaborate with Richard and other experts, colleagues that I saw are attending the webinar. And then we also work at EU level in Brussels, where we are focusing on level 4 instead. So vehicles without any driver. And the intention of this new piece of regulation was to harmonize what was done already at member states level, and as you mentioned, in particular by Germany and France. And this new ADS regulation covers approval of autonomous shuttles, robotaxis. So the first focus was related to these two use cases, but then it was also extended to cover commercial applications of hub-to-hub and automated valet parking. And this is done for type approval under the small series scheme. So this means that 1,500 registrations in EU are covered for each year for vehicle model. So this is a first step, let's say. So we introduced, for those who already read the draft regulation might be aware, we introduced new concept there. This concept indeed are kind of mixing analytical methodologies for safety demonstration together with a more conventional physical testing and also with simulation and virtual testing. So we have different annexes to the regulation, providing not only the technical requirements, but also the scenarios to be considered and the testing that have to be performed, as well as indications for documentation to be provided and how the audit of the safety management system would be performed. So the role of JRC was to provide the technical input. So we are basically a researcher and scientist, and the chef de file was a colleague from DG Grow, Mr. Anthony Lagrange, who was guiding us and who is indeed responsible for the drafting of the law. And also for setting up this new ADS type approval framework. So about the timeline for adoption. So we expect that the regulation will be finalized between now and May, so that it will be published in the official journal in July, thus complying with the timeline expected under the new general safety regulation. What I can say is that we also hope that this development at European level will, let's say, inspire or push a bit the agenda also at UNECE level within GRBA. And so I'm happy to discuss about that also with Richard. Because, as I said, the work there is mainly focusing on level 2 and level 3, and discussion is also, of course, ongoing on a more general and higher level of driving automation, but still no regulation, no draft regulation is being discussed there. You also asked me to comment about involvement with the member states. So what will change compared to the regulation that they put in place? As I said, this framework is trying to harmonize some practice at the EU level so that the first approval step will happen at EU level and will be valid with mutual recognition among member states. Still, member states and local authorities will have a role to play. because a part of the approval process will be done at the local level. So they will be responsible anyway for traffic rules and also for transport licensing. So in the example of shuttles that we mentioned before, there will be a type approval at EU level with evaluation of the general capabilities of the vehicle through testing, but then the practical operation of the vehicle in a specific city, in a specific country, in a specific city over a specific path will have to be assessed locally. And so for this reason, a good interface between EU rules and national local rules is, of course, very, very important. So we expect that part of the burden will still rely on member states and national authorities. So I would also like to mention that we are about to launch public consultation. And so, of course, we will be very happy to receive all of your comments and also from the audience, so that indeed we can have feedback on the concepts that we introduced. And as I mentioned before, this is not, let's say, final and ending results, but it's just a first step. And indeed, we are already discussing with member states and other stakeholders a roadmap for covering other use cases than the ones that I mentioned, and also to extend the approval beyond the small series, because we believe that this will be a kind of a learning period. So we'll have 1 or 2 years where we can understand indeed which are the capabilities and the needs of these innovative technologies. And we can also probably update the regulatory requirements based on what we learn. Still, with this new framework, we can be confident that the vehicles introduced on the market will be safe enough to start this process. So concerning your first comment, we need to be sure that the vehicles will be safe before market introduction, and we hope that with all the work and different approaches that we put in place in this new legal framework, this can be ensured. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Cristina. And I like when you said inspire, and the question is now, who is inspiring whom in this whole thing? I think it's a good exchange between all the parties that are involved here. And it seems to me that Europe is taking, a first step towards full automation. As you said, small series and the like. Question would be, why not taking like the big step immediately? I think that takes a bit more time, I appreciate. But before I say anything further, I saw Richard. And by the way, we have a lot of interest here. Also, questions are coming in and comments. So please, I would encourage, we will try to pick up some of your questions. And it's amazing to see where you all are. We have people from the Silicon Valley, Canada, Mexico, Singapore, all over the world. So that's really great. Richard, I saw that you were smiling a couple of times, and I'm sure you want to respond to this and the interaction. And your role is very interesting because it's on both ends. It's on the UN level, but certainly also you wear a German hat. So please, if you could kindly respond to that.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. And Cristina gave already some outline of the collaborations and activities that are going on. And I'd like to emphasize that all the activities on the national and European level, they are not in contradiction. It's not about the competition. It's about gaining knowledge, which we bring together to develop the full framework for automated and autonomous vehicles. That's the idea. The activities at the level of the United Nations, more concretely, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe is divided in two parts with regard to automation. The Economic Commission for Europe is a regional commission, but there is a global participation. There are acceding and contracting parties from around the globe, from America, from Asia, and from Europe, of course. And that's the important issue. And the two channels we have for automations are the WP29, who's working on the worldwide harmonization of vehicle regulations. And the second channel is the WP1, who's working on road safety. And the WP29, and here especially the working group GRVA I'm chairing, is working on automation, on the vehicle regulation, the technical aspects, and the WP1 and its working group is concentrating and focusing on road safety and on the development of a tool for the use of automated vehicles. So that's also an important step where an alignment is tried to be achieved in future for the use of automated vehicles and autonomous vehicles around the world. But I'm concentrating on the technology at the moment, so let me say a few words, a few sentences. Cristina mentioned already that one focus is the level 2, level 3 regulatory approach, so where we are drafting clear regulations, especially on the LKS systems, the automated lane keeping system, with some limited speed for a specific ODD and operational design domain currently on the motorways. But we also have an activity at the global level to expand it. I have to move a little bit because the sun is so bright here. Fortunately, so it's better now. So yeah, we are concentrating on the global level as well, looking into an approach where we are drafting guidelines for the time being for a whole vehicle, not for specific systems, which we have done so far for the regulatory approach on level 2 and level 3. And we have seen there is some limitation in doing this in terms of time you need to design it. So we are taking a different approach with a different new assessment methods, with validation methods, with several pillars for simulation, testing, and validation. And that's quite a new aspect in terms of drafting vehicle regulations and also the approving or certifying. It's a mixture of both of vehicles and systems. So that's an important aspect. I think we are on a good way. And we have, for the first time at the UNECE level, assigned the chairing of the working groups with the different regions around the world. So the American region, the European and Asian, they are all represented in the groups as co-chairs, collaborating together. It's not always easy because there are different timelines which they have from the policy, also the way it is addressed, whether it is a regulation or a guideline, but we are trying to do the best to define, or to generate common definitions. So to create a basis for automation, which is the same around the world in the different regions, in the different countries. And we are on a good way to achieve this. And with regard to the European aspect, I think the European Commission, as Cristina mentioned, is in the final stage, I would say, to set up a regulation at the European level. It's somehow, and that's quite good understood, a conservative approach in some way in terms of numbers, but I think it fits to the needs that is out there at industry, as far as I have heard. So that's good to hear. It will be input for the work at the UN level, and the same is for our activity in Germany. We have some different aspects as well in our national regulation, where we expand some functions or expand registered vehicles with additional functions that are linked to automation, and also the nationwide testing capabilities we will allow. But we will come to this later on when we talk about what kind of flexibility we will need. And I'm looking forward, and I'm quite curious to hear the discussion. So thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, well, thank you, Richard. Maybe a brief follow-up question. I mean, you mentioned Germany, and you mentioned that the EU approach is a bit more limited or more conservative at this stage. Germany's approach was a bit broader, I think, when it comes to level 4 with the new law from last year, and now also the ordinance just passed, at least the Bundestag last week or so. So how do you see this interplay? I mean, will you be able then in Germany to go beyond what you're just for Germany to go beyond what the EU is currently doing with the small series and shuttle services?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I keep it very brief. I think we are somehow able to go beyond what the European legislation does, but it's only possible in Germany. You know, it's just a national regulation with national validity. And
Right.
that's the advantage of the European approach. And that's why we are fully supporting the European approach. We need to have finally a harmonized regulation, a harmonized approach across Europe with all the 27 member states. But I think the areas where we can go beyond is some areas where also the Commission will at some point in time also draft regulations. So it's something where we gain knowledge, which we will bring to the table for discussions at the European level.
That's great. And Cristina, we will come back to you. Let us first maybe now look at the UK. The UK certainly has become interesting in this regard because you are no longer part of the EU, so you can do your own thing when it comes to this. But I'm sure you will first tell us a bit more about the joint report that you just issued. I can just encourage everyone really to read it. It is accessible online, was published, I think, on the 26th of January. So maybe you want to briefly report about that and also how you see the developments in the EU and other countries, and the countries in the EU like Germany, France, how you see that.
Yes, thank you so much, Patrick. And I really loved something that Richard said before about not seeing the developments in different jurisdictions as being in competition. Sorry, I think my connection is a bit poor. I hope that you can hear me okay. But yes, so we've developed some recommendations for new legislation in the UK, and I'll just give you a brief outline of that, but we're very much keeping a keen eye on the events. Of course, we're still very active members of the United Nations committees, the UNECE that was being talked about before. So the conversations are still very much ongoing, but we are excited about being able to take forward initiatives at a domestic level. I feel my connection is
We are hearing
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. It's maybe just the picture is frozen, but we hear you. We thought we would hear you. Just go on, Jessica. Okay, we are
fantastic. Sorry, a bit blocked. Thank you. So if you or maybe put it. I think that is looking a bit better.
Jessica, I think we are losing you now. So maybe.
Great.
Yes, I think we are losing you. Yeah, again, try again, and otherwise we will.
We have our aspect of defining surviving and the borderline, the threshold between that and drivers. That could,
Jessica, do you hear me? Jessica, you're breaking.
We need to have a very clear dividing line for users that is not based on.
Oops. Okay, it seems that we are losing Jessica. Can Cristina and Richard hear me? You can, okay. So maybe and Jessica, if you hear us, maybe you want to turn off the video so that you have a better audio connection. We will hear from Jessica later, but just to maybe then follow up on the European and member states position, I want to give Cristina an opportunity to also further comment on how you see that the member states took a bit of a broader approach here, and then eventually, may be able to do a bit more in their own countries. how do you see that development? And do you still think that this is a good development because you can learn from each other, inspire each other, as you rightfully said? And of course, on the EU level, you may have to take a bit of a more conservative approach, whereas the member states may be able to go a little bit beyond that. Do you want to briefly comment on that as well?
Yes, I totally agree also on Richard's comment and what you just mentioned. Indeed, what happens at national level, of course, is rightful and will also serve as a lesson learned at European level. So we will not have the same level of advancement or of expertise, of knowledge, or also of technology developments in all member states. So some member states are at the more advanced stage. And of course, we, as I mentioned, this EU ADS Act indeed is built as follow-up of what was done already by Germany and by France. So we took over the expertise and then we further developed, also based on indeed the discussion ongoing at the UNECE level within GRVA. So I didn't mention it, but I do it now. So the EU regulation is indeed fully in line with the principles of the multipillar approach that Richard mentioned. So you will find in our text, again, the different pillars from the audit and safety assessment to the physical testing, simulation, and also in service monitoring reporting. And as many of you might know, indeed the Commission is actively contributing, and JRC as well, in the UNECE working groups, also leading some of the initiatives. So we are perfectly in line. There are some maybe innovative elements, like one I think you spotted in one of your questions, this safety target, which comes actually from our own proposal and initiative, and we are willing to bring it also on the UNECE discussion table.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cristina. Maybe also addressed to both of you, because we, during the legislative process, both in Germany, but also on the EU level, there was some confusion about the term of manufacturer. There were some references previously also to vehicle manufacturers, which was a bit confusing. It seems that this has now been resolved. It also went out in the German ordinance where it was mentioned. Can we now assume that we really have the traditional definition of a manufacturer, whoever this may be, whoever takes responsibility, as we said? And I think we also, we addressed this point also in our white paper. I don't know who wants to go first. Cristina, maybe you are still unmuted.
Well, this matter was discussed indeed also in the work ongoing at the EU level. Indeed, we are not now addressing only vehicle manufacturers, but the ATS manufacturers might be a bit broader concept. So new definition will be needed and more flexible, as you mentioned, because ATS manufacturer might not only be related to the vehicle, so and equipment on board the vehicle, but in some of the applications, the ADS, so the system extends also outside the vehicle, so with off-board sensors, like for example, in some automated valet parkings applications inside garages. And so this becomes much more complex, and I think further elaboration of this concept would be needed.
Thank you, Cristina. And Richard, maybe also from your perspective, as this is an important topic.
Yeah. Yes, Patrick, and I can make it very, very short. It's a point which we indeed had in our ordinance, so the reference to the vehicle manufacturer, and we simply aligned it with definitions and the wording that is used in the European Type Approval and Market Surveillance Regulations, 2018/858. So that's the reason, very simple. And having same definitions, I think it's clear and helpful for all of us. Thank you.
No, that's great. And unfortunately, we lost Jessica, but I can tell you that in their report, they are introducing the term, let me look it up again, ASDE, the authorized self-driving entity. And they are also saying that this could be basically everyone, the vehicle manufacturer, the ADS developer, or whoever basically takes responsibility. So that's good news. There seems to be some consensus. among all, regions, EU level, national level, UK, when it comes to this? And do you think that this will also allow the level of flexibility that we will need to see going forward in terms of, there are different situations. The easiest one, of course, is someone manufactures a vehicle right away, an autonomous vehicle right away, but we can also see situations where someone purchases vehicles and then puts the ADS on top. How do we, also regulate that? And do we regulate it? With a broad definition, I would think so. But how can we, keep the flexibility with all the collaborations going on in the market, the partnerships and the like, and different entrants coming from various directions? Do you think our system will be flexible enough to allow this innovation also going forward, the legal framework? Again, Cristina, do you want to start maybe?
Thank you. Well, indeed, I think this will also be part of this learning time. So we're starting now this first phase, this first step of type approval under a small series scheme. But then we reserve like 1.5 or 2 years of learning time to understand indeed which gaps can be identified from the application of legislation in real world. And this can be part of this learning process for sure. Okay, and Richard, and then we will come to Jessica. I have a question for you, so that's good. Richard, yeah.
Yeah, it's good to have Jessica back. So just also a remark from my side with regard to the flexibility, also when an existing vehicle is amended or updated with additional technologies. I think this process is not fully new in the type approval framework we have, as we have some multi-stage vehicles where on several stages vehicles are changed and some capabilities are added, and the final manufacturer then is getting the approval, which was added up over the time. So in other words, I think there are structures and processes to address this. So if a vehicle, for example, would have a type approval or approval in general, and another manufacturer would add certain functions, capabilities to such a vehicle, it can be added in the current framework of approving a vehicle. So I don't see any issue in this. The important question always is who takes the responsibility for certain issues that would occur or incidents and so on. That's of course the point about the liability in terms of doing this step. From a technical point of view and from a procedural point of view, it's possible with the scheme we have. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we will get back to the point of particularly also safety. I want to give Jessica an opportunity because I was just saying that you have introduced this term authorized self-driving entity in your report. And I think it goes in the same direction as we just discussed, to be broad, as broad as possible, to be able to introduce this technology. Do you want to briefly comment on that? What was the reason for introducing this from a UK perspective?
Yes, and thank you for being patient with the roller coaster ride of my joining here. So originally we started off referring to the entity as an ADS entity, Authorized Driving System Entity, and we drew on work from Australia and the National Transport Commission there that was looking at ways of authorizing self-driving vehicles. But when we consulted, one of the things that came back very strongly is that we need to authorize the vehicle as a whole. Like the emphasis of the safety assurance process can't be limited to just the system, to the ADS in isolation, but we really need to assess it as integrated into the whole vehicle. So then we revised the emphasis to be about being an authorized self-driving entity that basically is looking more holistically at the vehicle, which, as Richard said, of course, might have multi-stage approval, different entities participating, but it's intended to be flexible, as you said, and that's the entity that's vouching for the safety of how it drives. And going to the point on liability that Richard again just now was mentioning, they are the entity that vouches for the fact that the dynamic driving is conducted to the standard that is expected by the regulators.
Thank you very much, Jessica. And now let's address the point of liability, or let's say safety. And Cristina, we have of course, you are a major expert in this field. And when it comes to the European draft regulation, it seems that they are now introducing something called the fatality rate requirement. Tell us a little bit what this is, and then I'd be interested to hear from Richard and Jessica how they see this term and how we can work with this.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, indeed, we are not really introducing a fatality rate requirement, but our intention was to introduce, indeed, three complementary approaches for safety demonstration. So safety through processes, as I mentioned, the audit of the safety management system of the manufacturer, then safety by measurements, and you will find in it requirements for specific maneuvers, where indeed a test will be run and then numbers, measurements will be compared with the requirements, and then safety by an overall threshold. So these three approaches are applied as best practice in many other transport sectors. I mentioned my background also lies in industrial and nuclear reactor sector safety, and indeed these three approaches are also present and applied there since decades. But I can also mention railway, aviation, and also maritime transport. So these three components have been put together in those other sectors as best practice to achieve the highest level of safety. And we also refer to a very important work done by the RAND Corporation, so the report Safe Enough, where indeed they carry over a research on this very aspect, considering this, the pros and cons of these three different approaches. And they also interviewed experts in the automotive sector, so coming not just from regulators, but also from research centers and industries and insurance companies. So they interviewed a varied group of experts, and the result is that indeed the best would be to combine all these three approaches. So that's why we also introduced this safety demonstration through an overall threshold. And then the challenge was to identify a suitable and representative safety target. So we had a thorough discussion with member states, with stakeholders, and the first and most obvious option was indeed to refer to the fatality rate per hour operation, because indeed we do not have a lot of data available from also conventional vehicles, but for sure we know the fatality rate on our roads. And what we want to achieve is that indeed we want to be able to demonstrate that this new technology, so the introduction of driving automation, will improve safety on our roads. This, of course, can be done only once a sufficient number of vehicles will be on European roads, but beforehand there will be methodologies, and there are methodologies being developed also to demonstrate that this target is met before market introduction through assumptions, simulations, and considerations, and so on and so forth, as it is done in the other transport sectors. So, of course, this is not really written in stone. So we are continuing the research on this topic, and we will be able to further refine, also with the support of industry and other stakeholders, the definition of this safety target. And still, you will find in the EU text that this is also flexible, in the sense that the manufacturer can use also alternative methods to demonstrate that an equivalent level of safety is reached. So we understand that this might not be the the golden tool to prove that the safety level is reached, because maybe in a specific country or in a specific city there is a much higher rate of accidents compared to what we are considering here as overage. And so this is still open for discussion, and different methodologies can be considered. But I would like to stress that this is not really a fatality rate target. Still, one of the advantages of setting a safety target as overall threshold is also related to the public acceptance. because all our beautiful requirements, let me say, on like safety management systems, on the processes related to safety, or on the braking capabilities, or on the emergency maneuver, or on how the ADS may run roundabout, or a turn, or a lane change, and so on and so forth, are difficult to understand to the general public. While stating, okay, we can demonstrate that the introduction of these vehicles will improve, or at least will not get things worse. So will improve safety on our roads, I think is a clear and direct message. So, but still, work is still in progress, and I'm for sure will be able to improve also what is currently available in the text. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cristina. This is very helpful, of course, to understand. And as you say, there will be a public consultation. Something is just coming in also in this regard. So maybe you will get also a bit more inspired by some feedback when it comes to this discussion. Because I could also see that in the public domain, there may be some concerns when there are discussions about a fatality rate or so. To me, it is very important that we have the right safety concept, that it is also approved by the technical service, which is also the approach that we see in the legislation, and of course, state of the art. So, Richard and Jessica, your comments on this would be very much appreciated. Yeah, Jessica, why don't you start this time?
That's very kind, Richard. Thank you. Yeah, this is a topic that was really interesting, and lots of people have been asking us about it as part of our authorization process, because we emphasized the political dimension of the threshold of safety that is accepted. Because as Cristina outlined, there are so many technical aspects to this and best practice about how we approach safety. But ultimately, whether we decide as a society that the technology is ready for our roads is something that is a democratic decision that the politicians need to take, and they need to own it, because it shouldn't be a company deciding that its risk appetite is such that it accepts, to go on the market. Of course, they do have their own different thresholds internally, but we need a societal one that is owned by our democratically elected leaders. So that's why the safety threshold in respect of comparing with the performance of manually driven vehicles is so important, because that's something quite transparent. And although there are differences between how much better people think we ought to require self-driving vehicles to be. And I saw in the chat, I think Furkan was mentioning that sometimes we exaggerate how bad human drivers are, saying that 99% of accidents are caused by humans. Well, they're driving all the vehicles at the moment, so it's easy to blame them. I think we all agree they shouldn't fall below the safety of manually driven vehicles, just like Cristina said, not making things worse. So there's that element, and I think that really relies on in-service monitoring. We can do, I think, more in the pre-deployment side. We can do more work on the safety concepts and the processes and measuring particular maneuvers, but the fatality and the safety metrics that we're expecting, I think they can have more meaning when we actually have deployment. But that's why when we have the first deaths that will be caused by a truly automated vehicle, with no safety driver, no human you can blame, it will be really important to point to all the benefits and all the lives that have been saved. And that can only happen if we've got robust data that compares apples with apples as far as we can. I know it's incredibly complicated, but we've got great experts to help with that. And there's also the question of risk distribution, because of course you can't make safety much better for vehicle occupants, say, and make it much worse for cyclists or other vulnerable road users. So there's a really important monitoring element when we talk about overall fatalities, because there's equality considerations and just equity as well.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Richard.
Yes, thank you. And I just can underline what Jessica and Cristina just said. I just would like to add that it will, of course, somehow be difficult to really define an objective overall safety threshold. I think the objective, of course, is to have a better level of safety and to reduce the traffic fatality numbers and the traffic incident numbers in general. I think that's the intention by introducing more technology. There are other issues as well, of course, about services and so on and business cases, but from a governmental point of view, it's clearly an aspect about 99% that were just mentioned in the chat and yeah, also cited by Jessica. That's a go. And the interesting point will be how to evaluate the performance of the vehicles while we do not have a very large population at the moment. So from the very beginning, how can we start to do some in-use or in-service monitoring of the performance of the vehicles? So we will, of course, have accidents. This will not then be caused by human driver, but the technology due to failures or whatever, aging of technology. These are all aspects we have to take into account. So we will have accidents in the future as well. But how can we start the evaluation from the very beginning? I think when we go 10 or 15 or 20 years to the future, it will be easy because we have a large population. But it is necessary to drive the safety of the vehicles in the right direction from the very beginning, and therefore tools have to be developed and discussed that allow the evaluation and of the performance, of the safety of the vehicle or systems itself. So, and we have different philosophies at the manufacturer's side. I think these are discussed in the world. I think we are experiencing it already. So that's something we have to take into account. So it's going to be challenging, I think, but we have to take this endeavor into account and do the best. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much, Richard. And I see we are running out of time, so we probably have to wrap up as this is further developing and the technology. Yeah. But I mean, remember, yeah, Cristina,
sorry,
you want?
Sorry to interrupt. I just would like to comment on what Richard mentioned.
Yeah, please.
So the in-service monitoring and reporting. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So the in-service monitoring and reporting framework will be very important since the beginning. So we are indeed establishing defining safety metrics, and we understand that we will need a framework to indeed monitor what will happen in real world once those vehicles will be driving on our roads. And the main objectives will be to check to confirm the compliance with the requirements, but also to learn from new situations that maybe they will not be ready to face. So something that will have to be updated and improved, and also to learn from difficult situations like severe accidents, crashes involving ADS vehicles. So what we can learn and what we can improve on the side of safety, both on the technology side and on the regulatory side. So this is a very important aspect, I think, for the deployment of this new technology.
Yeah, and just to add to this, Patrick, just 2 sentences. That's not easy because we have no dense collection of the accidents. Every country is, of course, collecting the accident statistics in general and in total, but not always for the individual and specific incident. And the challenge here is to gather this data of these vehicles. That's one part of our national regulation as well. That's fundamental to get this data to get the basis for judgment, for evaluation in this area. That's of utmost importance. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. This was really great. And of course, I mean, look, let me say it this way. The braking system 30 years ago is also different now. And this is also with the AV technology. It has to further develop. We have to improve on all levels. Thank you very much. I think particularly also from the industry, sometimes there is a wish for a more bold approach, a bolder approach, of course, when it comes to the legislation. I know you're all working on this. Another thing, and we couldn't discuss it further today, there are different levels of approval that you have to take, on the vehicle, on the ADS, on the ODD, the operating design domain, and then maybe also finally on transportation services, licenses, requirements, or something, if you want to introduce shuttle services and the like. So hopefully, you will be able to bring this all together in the legislation as far as you can, so that we make it quite easy and straightforward for the industry to bring these vehicles on the market. We run out of time. It's 2 minutes past the hour. It was a lot of fun. I mean, we had the real experts here on this panel. So thank you very much again, Cristina, Jessica, and Richard, for doing this with us today. I see there are a lot of further questions, and please feel free to reach out. There was one comment, engaging with the regulators. Yes, I think you can. And I think that the regulators are, keen to get in touch. There are consultations. Cristina mentioned it on the EU level now. Jessica, you had several consultations. Germany is also open, and the UN to discuss input from the industry. Otherwise, we will not achieve this big common goal that we have. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure. And also to people here listening, I saw there were further comments from people from Rwanda, from Australia, from Brazil. This is really amazing. So good morning or good night, and good evening to all people here. Thank you very much again, and see you at some point again, maybe. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you for organizing it, and thank you for moderating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.